I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Rose Byrne to talk all about her movie, If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. And in starting off, I wanted to talk about the visceral response that you had in reading this script, because Mary Bronstein's done such a phenomenal job in kind of interweaving these different tonalities throughout this film. And I've heard you describe how one of the things in the script was in the hamster scene that it's described as Jack Nicholson in The Shining trying to break through the door. And that's such a great example of just the stress and also this underlying humor that she weaves into the movie. And how did that really give you such a visceral idea of what this film could potentially be?
Yeah, reading the screenplay very much reflects what you see. It had great humor, like that, hilarious description of the hamster, and really cool horror, tropes in there too, tensions. It was just so wildly original, and she had something to say. It was a feeling. The script had this kind of hot feeling about it, and I couldn't believe that was sitting on my desk. I was just like, oh, good Lord, this is what an opportunity. I'm terrified. How do I not fuck this up? Bobby read it, my husband, and he was like, oh, you have to do this. This is extraordinary. She has something to say. This is like nothing he or I had ever read. He's such a great sounding board. So, and it's been, yeah, it is very much a reflection of the screenplay, though, the tone of it and the different genres within one movie.
And it's such a gift that you and Mary had so much time. You had 5 or 6 weeks together, just really going line by line. And was that process very much about having that level of, didactic conversation about all of the lines, or was some of it also really honing in on just the broader concept and themes in the film as well?
I mean, yeah, less about themes because you can't really play a theme. So it's like it was just like every scene. What is she doing? What is she talking about? What is this referring to? Just like peeling back the onion and figuring out a big question, which I've chatted about a lot, is who Linda was before this. Because we meet her in this, you drop like a marble dropped into this hot situation. There's no information given to the audience. She does not hold anybody's hand. This is like you are in, and then you realize you're really in about a quarter of the way through the film. Like, oh, she's controlling this conversation and this visual kind of experience you're having in a way that is quite arresting. And I felt like that was a huge part of our job, is going, okay, everyone's going to respond differently to this crisis. Who is she before? And let's reverse engineer to figure that out. And that really helped us. And, when you get to set, you have no time, especially on an indie film. It's very quick. Mary doesn't do a ton of takes. And without that gift of that rehearsal, I would have felt untethered.
Yeah. And she's filmed it in such an incredible way that really adds to the tension, with the fact that it was shot on 35, and I think I've heard her describe it as she wanted you to feel like you're behind Linda's eyeballs, quite literally. And so the camera's physically very close. And, it sounds like the first day there was a moment of like, oh, the camera's really going to be that close. But then after the first day, that it just wasn't even a thing that you had to be conscious of. You just knew the camera's going to be right there and it's going to get whatever I do.
It wasn't, I mean, I was conscious of it in that sense of just going, okay, what you need here is not what you need here, is what you not what you need here. And that is my job. Okay. You need this here, you need that. And that is a technical, creative conversation but I did that first day was the hardest day for sure of the whole shoot, because also figuring out the level of, it's a very sad scene, the opening scene, figuring out the level of the crisis. And the trap with this performance or this character is that it's one note, and that just is a hysterical kind of character that you will quickly lose interest in. And so trying to figure out the nuance. So that first day was the hardest day by far.
And that first scene gives us such a sense of, not just where we're meeting this character at, but just a lot of the emotion that goes into everything. Hearing her daughter describe her as being like putty, and, she gets sad sometimes, and just feeling such a resistance to it because it's actually so true within her. And how did that opening scene just give you that element that you were talking about before of, who she was before, but where we meet her at this point?
You're given no information too. You don't know how long this has been going on. Has this been going on a week, or it's been going on a year? Like, where, and that's our job, is like, you don't want to see an actor's homework, but you want it to feel lived in, and you want it to, and so that was really hard to figuring out that pitch in that first scene. And I feel like yeah, performance wise, I would felt like, oh my God, good Lord, I hope I don't mess this up. But Mary was singular in how she saw this film was truly in a way, a very easy conversation because she was so clear on how she was going to visually tell this story. And it was my job to just give her the options, because in the edit is when they're going to find what the film is, obviously. So, but I loved it. It's been really, truly a creative highlight of my career.
And even with what you're describing about, certain information that you feel, but you're not necessarily given, so much of that is in the essence of everything that she's going through with her daughter. And, it doesn't need to specifically explain what the health issue is. And, some of that comes from Mary writing this from a very personal space, but not wanting to tell her daughter's story. But I was curious for your purposes, kind of behind the scenes, how specific it was helpful to get, or if, you wanted to really just look at it in the way that the script does.
For me, more specific, the better. I'm like, more questions, the better. Did she? Well, but does that mean that, I'm one of those people who's just constantly, and like that in life, I think I'm a naturally curious person. So, but the story she's telling is not giving, it's such a tightly wound experience that's really a feeling. The movie is really a feeling, and people, it's been fascinating because it's obviously about being a parent and being a mother, but one of my best friends doesn't have kids, and she completely understood this film because it was a feeling that she's having. And obviously, and everyone's been a caretaker. And that at this point, Linda is really a caretaker of her child. She can't even see her child. And it's something, I think, it's been fascinating to hear people relate to that in a way beyond just a conversation, or not just, but beyond the conversation of motherhood.
And one of the pieces that feels so familiar, I think, to anyone as well, is that idea that you can be dealing with really monumental, huge things in your life, and it's the small things that suddenly break you. And it's never about the small thing. And so, what was that like, getting to look at little scenes where there's just things that feel like a small injustice, like they're not letting me buy alcohol because I don't have my ID on me. And that can be a thing that breaks you because of everything else in the day.
I think that that's the opportunity for comedy, is there's these grievances that become monumental, to just how you beautifully put it, that become, catastrophic, like not being able to get a parking spot. I can't get my bottle of wine. Her ceiling, her contractor's not getting back to her, it's these tiny grievances. And Mary's been doing a terrific thing at the beginning of screenings where she asks everybody to like take a minute and then she says, indulge me. But think about the worst thing that's ever happened to you, like the biggest trauma, and then think about the worst thing that's happened to you today. Maybe that your yogurt lid peeled off incorrectly and it spilt on you, but the movie lives in that space. But for me, even reading it, I just saw those opportunities for how the absurdness of the comedy of that.
And even to the point that you were making earlier about there was a danger with this character that it could have just been played very one note in terms of the levels of stress and tension. It's kind of wonderful to see these moments where some of the bigger things don't feel as stressful because they're familiar in her world as a character. And yet, like you said, it's the small grievances of the day that can really be something to break her because it's unexpected. And when you worked with Mary on the script, how did you find the different levels and the different spaces of playing within that?
It was about always backtracking, like how long has she been parking at this place? How long is she, getting all those specificities of like the context for us. And then on the day, it was how it was her painting her picture. Okay, today this is this. And then figuring out how hot to get, the levels of hotness around it. But Mary is a very funny person. She's an extraordinary observer of people and of behavior. And it's like her one of her incredible strengths as a visual storyteller and as an emotional storyteller.
There's also a real technical aspect as well, because Linda's trying to outrun herself in a lot of ways. And one of those is, okay, I'm going to go downstairs, I'm going to get this bottle of wine, I'm going to go to the beach and smoke and just try to really step outside of my mind. And so you have to kind of think very specifically about, those indulgences as well. And how does that calibrate your performance in different ways? And how would you kind of find those levels as well?
Yeah, she's trying to escape. To your point, she's constantly trying to escape with her breath work, with her this and her that. And there is like a central trauma there that it is like a existential boogie monster that's will catch up with her, but she's trying to escape. She's trying to escape. She's trying to escape. And it was great. We worked very closely with the heads of department, with hair and makeup, to just devolve the character by the end looking really like a kind of teenage zombie walking around with these black eyes like tunnels. And that was really fun to sort of track that, because it's a quick period turnaround once you get into it of how she's doing it. And when someone is drinking and smoking and not sleeping that much, that is a profound effect on behavior and on reality. I've had a lot of people who were like, I didn't think ASAP Rocky was real. I didn't think that Daniel McDonald's character was real. Like, really, because it's she's inviting you into that world of a sort of existential nausea a little bit, which I love because it's so fun, and I think that's kind of what it's like to be a person or a person in a crisis anyway.
It is, and even what you described about, working with like the heads of department for hair and makeup and all of that. What were the discussions that led to the specific hairstyle with kind of the undercut at the back? Because I loved that choice.
I love that you love that choice. So we were in the final stages of hair and makeup tests, camera tests, and something was missing. Something was missing. I said, there's something, we can do something else here. And I said, wrap it up, do a top knot. And I just said, let's shave it. And Mary came over before and she said, what? Are you sure? And she loved the idea. She got the idea straight away. She was like, oh my God, yes, yes, yes. But she was concerned about the actual choice decision for me, Rose, personally. And I just knew that it was a good intuitive choice to just visually help with this story of who she was, where she is, and it would be a good reveal later in the script and story. I have strong feelings about that hairstyle.
I love it. And even with what you were describing before about, there's all of these different stresses and tension and emotion, and then sometimes there's certain substances involved. It's a really interesting way to approach the physicality of a character because we do hold physical tension in our bodies in really interesting ways. And how did that kind of conform to the idea of movement or tensity that you had throughout your performance in a movie like this?
Mm. I mean, I love the physical aspect of stuff is so fun, and anything to take away from being subconscious too and being more in your body. And the thing with Linda is she's so disassociated. So when someone's that disassociated, their body's closed off, their face is closed off, but they're still responding, but responding from this black hole kind of thing. And that, so to physically kind of embody that was really fun, and just also again to like track the sort of reverse engineer of where it kind of ends up, and like just specific details, whether it's her like the tragic kind of nightgown she ends up in, the weird like punk t-shirt she's got on at the end, which was actually Mary Bronstein's t-shirt, which was about 30 years old. It was barely hanging together. Was really just fun visual storytelling, and to make sure her body language was always somebody who is in defeat.
And within the idea of tension throughout the movie, it also breaks the tension at certain moments. And it kind of feels like it really needs that. And, seeing moments where she is able to kind of be more present with her daughter and they're driving in the car and she's like singing along to the kids' music with her, or kind of what they're talking about while they're laying in bed before her daughter goes to sleep at night. And how did the script kind of really give you those moments of just breaking away from the tension and being able to find a completely different space in the character?
Mary was really clever. She knew she was asking a lot of the audience, and to keep them with her, you have to have those releases, whether it's like actually having a joyous moment being a parent, like the magic that you have with your children. I'm a mom, like the magical times you have, having a few of those moments. I think having ASAP Rocky was a wonderful choice because he brings such relief and calm and charisma to the screen. That's something you cannot teach. It's not something you can kind of like act like. It's like it's a cellular thing you have or you don't. And so she's in such control of the audience's experience, and releasing that tension through humor as well, obviously with the more comedic set pieces like the hamster, or even the more of the horror tropes. But I feel like her control over that visual storytelling was so finely tuned, and finely, like she was threading such a fine needle doing that, but knowing to keep them on side when to let the valve release the gas.
And as you mentioned with ASAP Rocky, with his character James, there is this calmness, and it's a very different energy that his character brings into scenes. And you kind of see Linda become slightly different version of herself around him too, which I thought was interesting to see. And it doesn't fully get her out of her head, but what was the difference and the change that you wanted to see in her in some of those moments?
It was interesting. Like he's the kindest character in the film. He has the most curiosity, the most warmth. He's not, his intentions aren't always clear about what he's doing, but he's like, he wants to know what's up with this woman, and the fact that she's completely so hostile to him makes it even more curious, because this is the guy who does not get turned down for want of for anything that he would want, because he's so charismatic and sweet. And those scenes were very fun to shoot because it was a different side of Linda. And as it sort of devolved into this like weird, it's like not a friendship, but a friendship. It's not a romance, but it's not a romance. So it's this fine sort of weird dance. And those scenes were really fun and funny, and again, the scenes with Conan were, again, had added a different texture to, and then the scenes when she's in her office, being a therapist, I think, those scenes were also very interesting to play, because it's such a reveal to find out that she is a therapist and she's clearly experiencing burnout and what that looks like. The audience desperately going, oh God, she should not be giving anybody advice.
And I mean, there's these really interesting parallels between the work that she's doing as a therapist with her patient, played by Danielle McDonald, Caroline, and the sessions that she's in with her own therapist, with Conan O'Brien, because, she kind of doesn't really adhere to the proper boundaries of a therapist-patient relationship with Conan. And likewise, Caroline is doing exactly the same thing to her. And so, how did you want those two situations to feel really connective in a lot of ways?
Yeah, it was really in the script too, this sort of symmetry of like she's getting advice from her therapist that she's not taking, and then giving that advice to her patient, and that patient is not taking it. And it's this sort of cyclical nature of therapy, and also your therapist who has a therapist who has a therapist who has a therapist and then where does it lead to, like the Wizard of Oz, of like a person behind a screen with smoke? It's a wonderful commentary on that. And she's doing a lot of transference with her therapist. Mary always puts it as, the Conan, the therapist and Linda storyline is kind of the love story of the film in a way. It is obviously never physically transgressive, but you meet this relationship at the bitter end when they're really breaking up. And in her mind, she's so disassociated and unprepared for it. But when it happens, the absolute devastation is sort of monumental to her, and she cannot believe that he's done that to her. The ultimate betrayal that he ends that relationship. But Mary's comment on that is it's just all in her filmmaking and in her writing.
Yeah. And there's something kind of heartbreaking about that therapy breakup scene with Conan's character, because it's almost the moment where she's the most revealing and the most vulnerable and the most truthful with herself in talking about her relationship of being a mother and really not seeing herself in that way. And when she talks about her previous pregnancy and the idea of what her life could have been. And then all of a sudden, the conversation kind of transitions to a different space where he ends that relationship. And how did that feed into a lot of the emotion of filming a scene like that for you?
It is, it's very sad. I mean, that reveal is huge and it's very uncomfortable. Like, and she finally reveals something, she finally kind of says something honest, and he leaves her high and dry, and he doesn't give her any help. And it is such a betrayal at that point, and it is her breaking point. It's sort of from then on, it just spirals out of control. It is the beginning of a wild third act for Linda. But it's beautifully put, to your point. I think it's the most honest beat in the film for her, for the character.
When she reaches that breaking point in that moment and she just kind of leans fully into the volatility, and then you have Conan just completely blank in response, and it almost feels like the more he stonewalls and doesn't give in to her, the more it raises her levels. Did you have an idea of how far you wanted to take those levels and how far you wanted to play that beforehand, or did you find it together?
Funny, it's like a thing of anticipate. You can't really anticipate until you're there and you're in the room and we're starting the scene, and it's my performance is informed entirely by his. You can't make a decision until you're there, and then that's when it becomes like are the gods going to be with you, or what kind of vessel do I have today? But it was definitely a scene that we all knew was a really extraordinary, important beat for the character. And in that scene too, you know, Conan has to toe a very tricky line because there is a lot of contempt for Linda at that point, and you can't how do you portray that? Like it's so we had some good dialogue around that, and we had good time that day. But she's, you know, it's a very, from the whole, you know, her vision for the film entirely, she just mapped it out very, very, very specifically. You know, I also think of the character of Caroline and then Linda, um, looking online at that Andrea Yates story and all these like horrible stories of women in the news who had reached that point in their story because no one had taken them seriously before about the problems that they were having. Oh, you're shaking.
Oh, it's my cat moving the computer.
Oh no, it's your cat. Oh no, oh no. And it's a nuanced conversation, but that the character of Caroline would eventually be a headline like that. And
Yeah.
again, women aren't helped and aren't listened to and aren't taken seriously. And that was it's another nuance in the film that I think she just threaded that needle very, very beautifully.
And there's also this real thread of watching a woman who's really trying to figure out her sense of self at a time where it's been completely lost. And one of the microcosms of that I thought was so interesting is anytime anyone calls her anything like, you know, refers to her as a mom or miss or ma'am, she kind of bristles at it very strongly because it's like that's kind of a transference. That's not who I actually am. And how did you and Mary really talk about the different ways in which she wants to have this sense of identity and self, but she just doesn't know how to find it?
She's completely lost her identity. It was a huge part of our conversation, and of how does that happen when you become a mother and you are referred to as just mom, and are you mom? And I've had friends who've come up to me who've seen the film, one of my best friends in particular, and she was like, I feel seen. I am so invisible in my life. I feel seen. And she does it in so many ways, but this film is like, you are not going to get away from this person's experience. She is not pulling any punches. I think that is part of the reason you don't see the daughter, is because understandably, as soon as you put a child on screen, your sympathies go with the child, as they should. It's a child. But she takes that choice away from the audience and says, no, you are staying with the mum. It's punk. I don't know the way to describe it, but she's just going, no, I don't care how you're going to respond to it, but you're staying with this perspective. And mothers, you know, in society, they're both revered and dismissed.
Yeah.
And this film lives in that space.
And there's also this aspect of, you know, whenever you're a grown up, whenever you're navigating situations for the first time that you have no idea how to do, you kind of still just want someone to tell you what to do and how to do it at certain moments. And she even asks for that, and she's constantly asking for direction and for help. But the trouble is that the help or the assistance that's being offered isn't what she wants or the parameters. It's almost like I just want you to acknowledge what I'm seeing is true and fact, rather than trying to change the reality of everything for me. And what was the space that you found within her in that regard?
I love that. That's such a beautiful way to put it, because no one's validating her. Nobody's validating her, which is like the first step. It's actually the first step of, like, from, you know, I have two little kids, and the first step they always say about a meltdown or a feeling is like to validate it. I get it. You're right. I see you're upset. I understand. Like, that makes sense. And no one is validating. No one's saying to her, it is hard. It is hard. It does suck. Nothing. No one is saying that to her. And it's such an interesting comment, you know, that no one will say that to her. Why won't they say it to her? Because she shouldn't have those feelings? She's not allowed to feel like that about this situation with her child? Is that why? Like, why? Why is nobody saying that? So that was, you know, that was a big part of it. It's a very simple request. No one's telling her what to do. And that it's sort of is like a raw scream into the universe of like of crisis.
And it also speaks to a lot of what we witness in her relationship with her husband, who Christian Slater plays, and the phone calls that they have, where, that's a place that she really should be able to find that validation, but she's not receiving it. And it goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning about, where was she before? And you think about where their marriage probably was before, but where it is now. And how did the idea of thinking about that history to now really help, especially because you and Christian are filming most of your scenes not necessarily in front of each other, but over the phone.
Yeah. Again, she paints such an incredible visual story with the movie because there's so many disembodied voices who are who are making her life a living hell. Her husband, who's this disembodied voice from all around the world, and in a way, he can't say anything. He's in an impossible position. Mary always speaks to this so well. There's nothing he can say that will make her feel better because there's so many grievances around what her position compared to his, and how dare he complain. And I think there's actually a lot of humor in that. She's hanging up all the time and her lying to him, all these sorts of like acting like a teenager, she's like, kind of tantruming with him. But it's the best choice she can make at that time with where she is. And then, the voices of the contractor who won't help her, the aggrieved, hostile husband of Caroline's husband, who's like, she's not in therapy. What do you mean she's left the room? You've got my son, It's just such again, such a nuanced, you think it's sort of, I think it's later when you reflect on the movie, a lot of people have added that all up and gone, oh, she's saying something with that. She's saying something with these voices, that these male voices that are there and are not helping and are actively hostile and have contempt for this person. And it's just a great thing again that she's putting in there that you realize later has what the cumulative effect of that, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And also wanted to talk about some of the scenes towards the very end of the movie. And in talking about the scene where you're with Danielle McDonald and her character has shown up at the motel and, all of a sudden Caroline runs away on the beach. And I love the detail of the fact that you go running after her, but very quickly Linda gets incredibly. And so I just wanted to ask about that particular choice.
This woman cannot run at this point. And Danielle McDonald was the fastest runner. She would disappear. We'd be like, wet cut. And she would be halfway to the Hamptons. I'd be going, she was so cute. She's such a wonderful person, and her performance is so heartbreaking. She just had to come in at such a level of a woman suffering postpartum, and she was experiencing psychosis, and she's just so beautiful in that part. It's a very hard part. It was a very hard part, I think, to come in and just perform those scenes cold, and she was just excellent. And I think the running scenes, I mean, I love anything physical because you're not conscious of your choices and you're not in your head about you're just doing something active, and it is refreshing and freeing. And of course, an opportunity for something funny, like she can't make it and all that. And then I remember there was a couple of weeks where I was just running. I was just running through Montauk at night. And then the scene where she's really running was fantastic and really fun to and that's a great just one shot of following Linda. She's running to the house to see if it, to see if she's right and that it's been fixed. That was very, really fun to shoot as well.
But I also think the idea of watching her physically not be able to run very far gives such reverence to the moment where she runs down to the beach by herself in the nightgown and really just physically is throwing herself into the waves and into the ocean. And there's this want to just literally physically be taken away from everything that she's feeling, because that shows how overpowering the emotions are in her body in that moment. And what was the emotional space of really leaning into that with such a physical scene?
It was, the sequence was very ambitious. It was a lot of the shoot was really around like the water temperature, like making sure we could get this made before it got too cold, and it would be impossible to shoot that sequence when the water was cold. The water was beautiful that night, the temperature, but it was very rough. And it was a lot of anticipation around that sequence. We nearly lost the cameraman. He went out, and the safety team had to kind of pull him back in. But I'm Australian. I have a great respect for the ocean. So I, was approaching it from many different ways of knowing the rip, knowing what we needed to get, And in a way, it was so provided by the physicality of what I had to do. And the water was rough that night, but it was also quite beautiful. And there's like an element of like baptism in that too, of like her rushing in. And I think the sequence plays quite powerfully at the end. And she can't face what she's done. Her husband is there. She finally has a reality check in front of her, and she's still trying to escape. She's still trying to escape. But I do think the film ends with hope.
Yeah. I mean, in talking about that final scene in the movie where,
Mm.
it's the first moment that she fully sees her daughter there. And I think there's, like you said, there's all these interesting interpretations from the audience of, are certain things real or are they imagined in different ways? And, what was your perspective on that final moment? Because I think that could be something that is real or is a completely different outcome for the character.
And I am open to interpretation. I mean, I see it as hope at the end. I feel like it is hope. I don't know 10 minutes later what is going to happen to that character, but in that moment, she finally sees her little girl. She finally sees this little face, and it's just a little kid, you know, and she's trying. She says, I'm going to, I'll do better. I promise, it's like, makes me teary now just thinking of it, but just because it's someone who's going to try to do better. And whether she will, I don't know. But in that moment, I do think the film, how can you not end on a child and have hope,
No, I love that description of it. And it's so wonderful kind of seeing everything that you've pulled into a performance like this that really asks you to use every single skill and every single piece of experience that you've gotten throughout your career. So congratulations on a phenomenal performance and thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you for a great chat. Thanks.